Creative destruction is the process by which new businesses get created and destroyed. And it is part of everyday life. To share with you some insights on creative destruction, I've decided for once to not record a clip in the home studio, but rather to use an older recording of a lecture that I gave on the Tilburg University campus. And the lecture was part of what we call the Resilience Project. That is a project which aspires to train students to become resilient, to bounce back after adversities. In the lecture we talked about resilience from an economic point of view. And I'd like to take you to the classroom to discuss this topic with you.
Yeah, so the question that we deal with is, what is a resilient economy? So resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. So how does that, you can clearly see that in the individual context. Something happens to you and you bounce back, and then you will be considered resilient. But what does that mean at the level of the economy? How can an economy bounce back from an adversity, from a crisis? How can economies advance as well? And what does that then subsequently, what effects does that then subsequently have on the individuals involved? So you can say that for the system as a whole, it's good or bad that change happens, but for members of that system, the effects may be counter to what you would predict for the system as a whole. We've discussed before the life cycle. It's shown here a bit differently. The life cycle of organizations, and at that point we also went into failure at each point of the life cycle. So organizations start as a startup with an idea, and I said at that point that businesses can fail there because they fail to amass the resources needed to produce the product or to convince customers to buy it. So it's funding or consumer factors that largely predict failure at that point. Then the organization grows, and at that point also failure may occur when the product suddenly catches fire, right? It becomes something of interest to consumers. Then the firm needs to produce suddenly at a large scale, and it doesn't have the right procedures in place to do that. Then as well, a firm may, in spite of many opportunities, fail to produce what is needed. And then beyond that, if organizations also manage to adjust their organizational structures to fit the growth stage, they move into a stage of maturity where they know how to produce on a large scale. At that point, more and more individuals get an interest in the organization, more action groups, activists, the environment, representing the environment, representing labor, representing suppliers. They all make claims on the organization. And if, again, the organization fails to meet the critical demands from stakeholders, it may also fail at that point. Then we see that the market saturates, so it no longer grows, and then declines, and at some point organizations no longer provide the products that consumers really need, and you again get the risk of failure at that point. So failure exists in every stage of the organization. And this is Joseph Schumpeter, who studied the effect of firm founding and exit of firms to and from industries on what is called total factor productivity. So if competition increases, is that actually good for the productivity of an industry, or is it a bad thing? And he came up, and there's this famous quote from him, which focuses on industrial mutation, that is new firms entering and old firms, or also new firms disappearing, leading to incessantly revolutionizing economic structures from within. So that's changing the the practices as they exist, and also incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one. So there's three things going on. Businesses change. Well, we've seen that is very difficult for an organization to change, particularly in its core. New firms enter, old firms disappear, and the total of that is what's called then industrial mutation. So creation then. So there's two things, and I'll focus on them separately: creation and also the exit from destruction, creative destruction. It has both of these terms in one concept. Creation, and you can think of the application being sustainability, which is a part of the economy where a lot of creation happened over the past 2 decades. If you think of the ability of current generations to meet their own needs without harming the needs of future generations, there's a lot of new business initiatives that arose, centering on, for example, new product technologies and new types of products. So organic food is one that grew rapidly. New product technologies, think of electric vehicles, so cars powered not by combustion engine but by electrical engines. That's an update of technology rather than an introduction of new products. Recycling, that's an entire industry that revolves around what you do with waste. The robot nurse, although in its infancy still, is a real risk to real nurses. So there it's either or. It's a zero-sum game. If we add this new product, then old product has to disappear. So this creation of new products may originate from incumbent firms, that is firms already active in the industry, or new entrants. And new entrants is the case where you have this start of the life cycle, where we say that there's this entrepreneur who thinks, gosh, building electric vehicles could be an interesting idea, and then you get companies like Tesla, which focus entirely on this product. It could also be that incumbent firms, incumbent car manufacturers, come up with this idea and then start a new product line that has this new technology in it. And I would say all car manufacturers today produce it. There's room for new entrants because incumbent firms find it difficult to change their position. Right? If they've reached this level of maturity, they know how to deal with demands from consumers, but they also have their operating procedures in place that serve a purpose. So you can't just say, okay, we have this assembly line, but now we need a new product, so let's just redesign it. So that's costly. So they're committed to procedures that are already in place, and changing that is difficult. Hence, there's room for new entrants to jump in that niche in the market. Firms also get imprinted by the conditions at the start of their founding, and this is really remarkable. If an organization is started in conditions of scarcity, so if you start an organization at times when there's an economic crisis, the organization becomes, for decades later, a different type of organization than if you would have started that same organization in the context of material abundance. And so there's conditions at founding, as we call it, and they have long-lasting effects, making it difficult for organizations to change. And that is called the liability of scarcity. So if an organization starts in terms of scarcity, then that is something that they keep with them throughout their development. This creation then leads to exit. New products get introduced, and then old products disappear. Sometimes one-on-one, as I just said. Right? It's the robot nurse that pushes out the real nurse, but also sometimes more indirectly, when streaming first pushes DVD out of the market, and then later on, presumably also pre-programmed television channels. And then who knows what will be next. And that there's much less clear what pushes out what. So incumbent firms sometimes exit. That's the idea that we have, right? There's this new organization that starts its business, and the old organizations, they can't keep up, hence they disappear. That's what happens, but we also see new entrants disappearing at a quite speedy rate. As I said, failure is quite probable at the early stages of founding an organization.
I think it's about 80% of new organizations that fail.
Yeah, and this is what we call a revolving door regime. What the article calls a revolving door regime. It's when organizations or entrepreneurs try a new organization, which may be a good idea or not, but they fail to organize their business well enough, and then the organization goes bankrupt, and then they try again, and so there's this constant kind of circle of organizations that pop up and then disappear again, because they fail, and the incumbent organizations they kind of remain in place. Sure, organizations also have the resources to kind of sit and wait whether a new product will be effective, or whether they're able to push it out or buy it up. And also, as I said, there's creative construction, right? So not every entry leads to exit. Sometimes entry is just a new product that is creative, so there's new business arising, but there's no old business that disappears. Organizations get into this kind of revolving door regime because they fail to realize the scale at which they can efficiently operate. Right? A growth firm that has the right procedures in place to produce at a cost that is competitive with the older firms that already exist.
So you're actually saying, if I can summarize this, for the big firms, the problem might be that it is hard for them to change, and that might lead to failure. And for small startup firms, it's hard for them to get the right procedures into place in order to grow enough with the demand.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's the biggest reasons for failure in these two different stages of the organization.
Yeah. Sometimes the big organizations just wait for the new games to pop up. So or app design is also one. Yeah. And then they say, "Ooh, this is an app that is gaining traction. I'll just buy it."
Yeah.
So these organizations don't develop new ideas themselves because they can't change. Yeah. But they have the resources to buy their new competitors before they become a real threat. Yeah. Now, research shows that about 13% of changes in employment are due to turbulence rate. And turbulence is the sum of firm founding and failure. Hence, 87% of changes in employment are due to changes within organizations. So, of all people that change jobs in a given year, 13% is due to the firm for which they used to work not being there anymore, or there being a new firm for which they now start to work. And 87% of changes in jobs is just people moving from one company to the other, or a company organically growing to meet new demands. Now we've introduced the terms creative destructions, creating new organizations, destructing old ones, sometimes creating without destructing, and then destructing of which, right, the old or the new firms. And then to the question, is that actually a good thing or not? It is because we want food that takes into account animal rights that there's an industry producing vegetarian options. It's not the other way around. It's not that the firms produce something which we buy. We want something, and then the firms start to produce it.
I always find this a strange argument, and I don't want to go into it too much because that would be a whole different lecture, I would say. But if I I'll try to rephrase. Imagine that I am eating meat and I think, oh, wait a minute, I would like to become a vegetarian. Then in order for firms to notice, there already has to be a vegetarian product, which is provided by a firm, right? So how does this change then if you say that it's firms that are waiting for consumers to show what they want? Because how can consumers buy them what they want if the firm hasn't produced it?
Yeah, well, there's two answers to that. First, of course, firms do market research, so they engage in predictions as to what people want. And second, there's a lot of stuff going on at the niches around the core. So the core of the market, which today still is, if you talk about meat, the average consumer eats meat for something like 6.5 days a week. So for every vegetarian, there must be something like 7 full-time meat eaters. Right. So this is, although it sounds like, and also in our environments, presumably we see this happen quite often. Nationally speaking, it's a marginal phenomenon. And so products often develop in the margin. And then there's this company that becomes really successful in this margin, and that's when companies pick this up. And so preferences are not homogeneous. And there's a group of people that starts to adopt a new product, and then that becomes more popular in the market, and then indeed firms start to produce for the changing preferences.
All right.
So if preferences change, and or if technologies improve, if new technologies arise that allow us to do things differently or better, then firms start to innovate to make use of these possibilities. They start to cater towards people who voice a demand, or they think that if I adopt this technology, my production process will become more efficient. Hence, I will be able to make a larger profit with the same for the same level of sales. And both of these then, so the changes within firms and the entry of new firms, lead to exit of both incumbents or entrants. So this follows from changing preferences. It's firms entry or exit. You can say, is that good or bad? Well, it's the result of innovation within firms, and new ideas popping up in the minds of entrepreneurs. And that is again the result of consumers wanting different things, or shifting preferences, or new technologies allowing us to do things differently. So if you want to answer the question from an economic point of view, is it good or bad that creative destruction happens? Is it good or bad that firms fail? Then you might as well ask, is it good that we change opinions? Right? Is it good that we change preferences? Is it good or not that we have technological advancements? The answer, as always, depends.
Yeah.
And it depends on, then I would say, what these preference shifts or technological changes are like. To give you a couple of examples. Changes that lay off a large number of people. You could say, well, that's in the short run, that's a bad thing, because all these people will get unemployed. But in the long run, we free up labor that can now do different things. So robot nurses may seem bad, but as long as these nurses are able to find alternative employment in the long run, and that's also good for society, it may not be that bad at all. So it's good that firms leave. It's good that firms fail, because that is because we have new products that are better than the old ones that are pushed out. If you value that we make less use of natural resources, then technological changes that allow us to make use of less resources and that push, for example, oil giants companies out of business, that would then be a good thing. Right? So if a big oil company goes bankrupt because we've now thought of different ways to power the economy, so to generate electricity, then you may say that's a bad thing because all these people are laid off. But if you value that we make less use of resources, then it's actually a good thing. When you value something and the economy produces what you value, then that is good. And if it would not be good, then it is not good because business doesn't produce the right thing, but because you want the wrong things.
Yes, but it doesn't matter whether I want perfume or whether I want a semi-automatic gun to an economist, right?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to figure out. Yeah. It's the market.
And of course, there's external effects, right? If you want something that has an effect on others, then that may still societally be a bad thing. Right?
Yeah.
So if you want a gun because that provides for your safety, and the price of that gun does not include the negative effects it has on the people that you shoot, then it would still be societally a bad thing because there are externalities that are not priced.
Okay.
But if all externalities are priced, then
that would be taken into account.
Then it's taken into account.